Folks, the gun is ready to fire. At this point, you might want to block your ears.
Gun is up and ready, sir. First Sergeant, gun is up and ready.
Sergeant, on my command.
On the captain's command.
Folks, we're going to dedicate this first firing to those 4 Marine artillerists who lost their lives several days ago. Fire! Now, folks, you see how much smoke is pushed out by one gun. That was a very small powder charge. That was about 12 ounces of powder. During the Civil War, they fired 1.25 pounds to 2.5 pounds, depending on the gun. So imagine a 6-gun battery firing all at once. Well, the enemy lines are going to become pretty obscured. So they need to see where those first rounds are landing, because they're going to be doing a lot of compensating from there. Now, as I said earlier, this gun could fire an array of different types of projectiles. Now, the round ball, as you see here, came into the field packaged just like you see it. The ball attached to a wooden disc, which they call the sabot or sabot. The powder bag is tied to that. The whole thing is manufactured in arsenals. And a lot of those rounds are being manufactured by women. Now, another round that the gun could fire is a shell or a spherical case. Now, you can see this one has a little hole in the end of it, and that's for a fuse. Now, it's not a fuse like we think of a fuse in a firecracker. It's more of a cigar-shaped item. It's a cigar-shaped piece about that long. It's actually a kind of paper mache wrapped pasty compound of fulminated mercury and gunpowder. And when it hardens, it forms this little cigar-shaped tapered item. And on the side of it, there's these little hash marks which designate 1 second of burn time. So they could cut a fuse from 10 seconds down to 1 and anything in between. And they did cut the fuses that short. When the powder bag goes off, the flames engulf that ball, and that's what lights that fuse. So now it's in flight and it's burning. About a 60% success rate with those types of fuses. Now, this is canister round. This turns the gun into a giant shotgun. You can see we cut a little window out of this one, so you can see the little iron balls inside. There's probably about 27 to 30 iron balls in there. And as I said, it turns the gun into a giant shotgun. They would fire that at about 500 to 250 yards. So when the infantry got to 500 yards, that's what they're firing at them. When they get to 250, they're putting 2 of those canisters down. And that gives you that term that you probably heard, double canister. Now, how devastating is that compared to the iron ball? Well, you'd think that iron ball is only going to hit a couple of guys. That can't do as much damage as that. Well, I saw a demonstration that was done by West Point, where they set up a series of targets, silhouette targets, like, shaped like men, and they hung canteens and haversacks on those men, and I thought it was kind of a nice little, touch, and they fired the canister at the targets. Well, I knew it was going to, look like there was a million holes in it. And then they set up a fresh set of targets and did the same thing with the canteens, haversacks, whatever. And they fired that iron ball at those targets. And when they show you the target, they look the same. And I said, that's impossible. And no sooner do I get the words out of my mouth, the instructor says, whatever this iron ball hits now becomes a projectile and flies through the ranks, which I never thought about. These guys were getting killed by pieces of rifle butts, canteens, cups, whatever these soldiers were carrying now flew through the ranks and became projectiles. Pretty devastating when you think about it. And I never thought about it because we never see that in, the reenacting community. When we reenact, obviously, we're not firing any rounds. You don't even think of that stuff. But that's the kind of devastation that could happen during the Civil War. Now, Battery B, 1st Rhode Island, was mustered into federal service August 13th, 1861. They fought for 4 years with the Army of the Potomac, 2nd Corps, 2nd Division, and they were at every major campaign that the Army of the Potomac was involved in. They were not at Appomattox, but on the road in the morning, first to leave when the flag of truce came through the lines. And according to the regimental history, the flag of truce dipped to go under the guidon of Battery B. So they were on the road first in line when the flag of truce came through. As I said before, the vehicle to the rear is a limber. It's not a caisson. A caisson is another two-wheeled vehicle with two ammunition chests on it, and it's usually several yards to the rear of the gun. Each gun, not only did it have its limber that pulled it with an ammunition chest on it, but every gun had a caisson that followed it with two ammunition chests on it, plus its limber. So there's 4 ammunition chests at each gun's disposal. I'm going to go through the positions for you, and it'll give you a better understanding for the next firing. Number 1 man. The number 1 man, sponges and rams. The sponge extinguishes any lit embers that might be left behind. Don't forget, their rounds are wrapped in a cotton flannel bag, very flammable. So if there's a spark down the tube, it's going to set that off. We also use a crooked handle rammer for ramming. It was not used in the Civil War. We use it for safety purposes. It's called a French rammer, and it was used before the war. It was done away with to streamline the drill. Number 2. Number 2 man inserts the charge and worms. The worm extracts any powder bag remnants that might be left behind, smoldering, making it very dangerous. We also dry sponge at this position, something that was not done during the war. Again, we do it for safety purposes. Number 3. Number 3 man tends the vent and pierces the charge. He's wearing a little leather glove on his thumb, which we call a thumb stall. That's placed over the vent, and that keeps any air from being sucked in when the sponge is pulled out. That could pull air down through the vent and fan any lit embers that might be left behind. So they want to seal that off and ensure that all the sparks are extinguished. He also pierces the charge with a priming wire. It's a little brass thin wire, and it pierces open the charge to expose the charge powder for the friction primer to set off. Number 4. Number 4 man actually fires the gun. That cord he's holding is a lanyard. There's a little iron hook on one end, and that little iron hook hooks into a loop that's on the friction primer. The friction primer is a little tube of brass with a powder charge in it. There's a wire that comes in at 90 degrees. It's twisted to form a little loop. That hook is put into that loop, and when pulled, it creates a spark that sets off that little powder charge. That powder charge sends a flame down into the main chamber, and that's what sets off the main powder charge to propel the projectile. Number 5. Number 5 man brings the ammunition up from the limber to the gun. He never actually handles the ammunition. It's placed in there back at the chest, and when he brings it up to the gun, number 2 takes it out for insertion into the tube. Depending on what the type of round the gunner has called for, remember those shells and fuses? He might stop at the gunner so the gunner can inspect it and make sure that everything is all set and ready to go. Number 6 and 7 men. 6 and 7 men would have been back here at the chest, preparing ammunition, cutting fuses. And there's also a chart on the inside lid of that ammunition chest. And that's basically to give degrees of elevation that he can relay back to the gunner. The gunner today is our Corporal Jones. He would have been in charge of this gun. He sights the piece. He calls for the different types of ammunition, and he also makes sure the men are doing their job according to the manual. Chief of the piece. Chief of the piece is our Sergeant Pedro. He's in charge of this gun and the caisson that would have been to the rear, making sure that ammunition is being brought up to the gun as needed. He's also watching for the effects of the rounds on the enemy lines, and he's giving information back to the gunner so he can compensate from there. Now, if there were 2 guns on the field, that would come under the command of a lieutenant. And in a 6-gun battery, there's 3 sections. So there would have been 3 lieutenants. The overall battery is commanded by a captain. Now, the young lady you see that was passing the rounds around, she's known as a vivandier. Vivandiers were gals that came out. A lot of times they had husbands that were in the unit, and they wore this quasi-military uniform that kind of separated them from civilians, obviously. They gave first aid on the field. A lot of times they actually helped with during battles if needed. They would do whatever they needed to do to get the job done. Now, folks, we're going to fire one more round for you. You'll have a better understanding on how the gun is firing. And after that, we'll have a question and answer period, and if you want to take a closer look at the gun, as soon as it's secured, you can take a closer look. So with that, for Sergeant,
Sir.
load.
Gunner, load! Here it is, load, shell, 950 yards.
Now the gunner has called for shell, 950 yards. Number 5 stops so we can inspect it. He proceeds up to the gun.
Thank you.
Number 2 is now taking the projectile and round out, placing it into the tube.
Tube's loaded.
Number 1 is now ramming.
Charge, ram! Sighting the piece.
Gunner's going up to sight the piece. Gives a sign he's ready.
Ready.
Charge is now being pierced,
Priming charge.
and the friction prime is now being set into the tube. Again, folks, you might want to cover your ears.
Piece is up and ready, sir. Piece is up and ready for us, Sergeant. Piece is ready to fire.
On your command, Sergeant.
Gunner on your command. My command, fire!
Now, folks, that concludes our firing demonstration. If you have any questions, as we say in the artillery, fire away.